It can also represent green. Green is the balance color. In the middle, again, the G is in the middle. In the middle of the visible spectrum, we find the frequency green. It's the color that represents balance, nature, getting into harmony with nature. Green is found abundantly in nature, the most abundant color in nature. It's the love energy color. It's the color ascribed to the heart chakra. Okay? The Anahata chakra, as we looked at when we looked at Kabbalah and the chakra system. So green is another word that the G could represent. The gift of life, the gift of compassion, the gift of intelligence, the gift of emotions. Okay? The capacities that we can experience these things in while being human are gifts. It's the gift of the human brain. The three aspects of the human brain correspond to these three symbols in conjunction with each other. Okay? The square, right? The R complex, the G, the midbrain, the mammalian aspect of the brain, the emotional brain. Okay? And then the compasses, left and right brain hemisphere, the neocortex, the telencephalon of the brain. Okay? This threefold pattern is repeated because it's all about consciousness and the self. That's what this is all about. People who want to continue to think all these traditions are about something external, go right ahead. Believe what you want and keep being deceived. These are all about the self and the tradition of understanding that we are all one, that we are all in the same situation together, and that we are all aspects of the divine, and to recognize that divinity in all others, period. But, you know, people will insist that's not what it's about just because sick, twisted, psychopathic people have perverted these teachings over time. So there is no original teachings. It's all one thing. And, you know, that's what I believe, and I'm sticking to my guns no matter what the evidence to the contrary points to. Good luck with that. For those of us who really want to understand something deeper, let's continue. More about the G, okay? So I also stated it could represent the gate to higher consciousness, okay? Higher consciousness is often depicted symbolically as a gateway or portal, a stargate, okay? The gate to the gods, the gate to heaven, the gate to higher consciousness, all right? So gate could be another interpretation, all right? What I said at the end of last week's show, and what we're going to explore for a little while tonight, is what this G, the highest meaning of it, in all of my studies at least, that I've come to learn about what this G represents, is known as the generative principle. Now, the generative principle is essentially everything I've been trying to teach since the beginning of coming forward into the public. Everything I've tried to teach through my video series, my presentations, my podcasts, all of it. The understanding of the generative principle is really the only thing that can save humanity. If we don't understand how we create what we get, good night. And you could tack that on to what the G represents, okay? Joking, of course, but my point here is the generative principle is about causality, okay? The causal relationships regarding what we experience in what we call life in this three-dimensional space-time continuum. The underlying causal factors, which I said on day one of doing this show, which by the way, this is the 1-year anniversary of What on Earth is Happening Tonight. I've been doing this for exactly a year. It started on March 30th, 2010. Today's the 29th. This is the 1-year anniversary show. So, the generative principle. What we get is a result of causal factors that get set into motion. And if we don't understand those causal factors, or in other words, how we indeed created the manifestation called what we got. If we don't understand how we did that, we're going to continue to create things unconsciously that we don't want. The goal here is to learn what creates certain things and what creates other things, and then to choose wisely between those creative forces. And as we said before and looked at in depth, ultimately the only two things that really create or generate is love and fear. These are the underlying creative forces that go to work into making the experience that we all collectively share, called reality or the truth. Okay? So we need to understand how those two polarities work and how our choices between those two basic polarities ultimately affect everything that comes into manifestation in this reality. That is the generative principle, and it is the underlying hermetic principle that underlies all of the other hermetic principles that we looked at. We looked at those in the presentation about natural law. Okay? The 7 hermetic principles. The generative principle is the one overarching, unifying principle that underlies and unites all of those other 7 principles. And if we look at the number 8, it is an infinity symbol, which means ultimately this is how it always has been, is now, and always will be. It's infinite. It's eternal. It's forever. The generative principle is forever. It always has existed, exists now, always will exist, and everything in creation is bound by it. The end. And get over it. Okay? Yet, this is the thing that dark occultists do not want people to understand more than anything else. Above all else, they do not want you to understand how we are the creators of what we are experiencing. They want you to think you're powerless over it. And they have most people fished in hook, line, and sinker to believe that that they are powerless over what is created in the world. And this is not so. That's one of the biggest lies there is. Probably second only to the biggest lie that there is no such thing as truth. The generative principle is what Freemasonry is ultimately trying to teach people, and what dark occultism and dark forms of Masonry, I don't even want to use the word Freemasonry in connection with dark Masonry, because it is not what Freemasonry is about. It is a perversion, and I make the delineation between true Freemasonry, or what I call light Freemasonry, and dark Masonry. Okay? Because they're utilizing two completely different kind of building materials. Light Freemasonry is building with light, the light of higher consciousness and love. Dark Masonry builds with walls that it erects, seeing everything as separate. Okay? And it builds through mind control. You're trying to get people to accept authority as truth instead of truth as authority. Alright? So, this G ultimately represents the generative principle. And what that generative principle ultimately is care. And again, that connects back with the emotional aspect of the self. Care. What we care about, ultimately, to focus our attention upon and then to put our actions toward, is what we're going to get. The end. That's it. That's how it works. If we don't care, we're going to continue to get results we don't want. And again, I'm unpopular for saying things like this, but I've said this before on the show and will continue to reiterate it, and I'm going to at the Free Your Mind conference. This is why dark occultists are kicking our rear ends. This is why they're getting what they want, and they're continuing to rule this reality, and why we seem to be running around like chickens with our heads cut off, wandering around blindly, still not understanding why we're not getting what we want, which is true freedom. And why we suffer so much collectively here. It's because dark occultists, the people who have perverted this very tradition, do have a form of care. They do have unity consciousness. They have sick, twisted, demented, psychopathic thoughts. They do care about what they want to achieve and put into manifestation, and then they have the willpower to direct their actions into harmony with those two principles. Therefore, they're unified amongst themselves, which is the most important thing to be unified with, in conjunction with the truth. But the universe will reward unity in favor of disunity every time. And that's an unpopular thing to say, because what basically I'm saying is, because they're unified in evil, they're going to continue to win. And it's true. Their thoughts, their emotions, and their actions are unified, and they act as one, essentially. Our thoughts, emotions, and actions are not unified. We don't act as one, and therefore we don't get what we want. And even if there's a few people that do align themselves with truth and are trying to explain these principles and concepts to people, unselfishly put knowledge out into the world, they still won't necessarily get what they want unless enough people do it. Put it into practice, put it into manifestation. Knowing it is not enough. Doing it is what ultimately matters. And that's what the dark occultists, ultimately do. They have all three of these principles in line, in harmony. And cry in your milk over it, folks. Cry in your milk over it. Get as upset about it as you want. It happens to be the case. And the point is not sitting there upset about it, because that's letting your emotions rule you instead of the other way around. The point is, understand how it works and then do something to correct it by first correcting yourself and how you're out of alignment with the generative principle. Come into alignment by bringing your thoughts, emotions, and actions into unison with each other, and care truly about understanding truth, putting it out there for other people, and then live in harmony with it. That's putting the generative principle into effect with your thoughts, your emotions, and above all, your actions. Because as we've said before, you can know this stuff, you can think and feel all you want. Unless you bring your actions into harmony with those two other aspects of consciousness, it does no good. No ultimate good is going to be manifested in the world. Because the people who do bring their actions, even if it's for a dark purpose, into harmony with their thoughts and emotions, or lack of emotions, I should say, okay, they're going to be rewarded for it. The universe is going to grant them what they ultimately desire. So, the people that want to think, oh, there's some benevolent force that will never allow that to happen, are deluding themselves. There is a benevolent force out there, and it wants us to have what we want, but it's always going to reward unity consciousness over oppositional consciousness. And like I said, get as offended or upset about that as you want. That's how it works. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how it works. So I'm explaining to you, this is why the dark occult rule this planet. This is why people who truly want freedom don't have it. This is the reason, because the bulk of humanity exists in this oppositional form of consciousness where their thoughts, their emotions, and their actions, symbolized in this tradition called Freemasonry, and in other occult traditions which we've looked at, okay, are not in unison, are not in unity with each other. That's it. And that is the generative principle, or the generator, okay, or Genesis, meaning creation. All words that start with G. The generator, okay? In other words, the force that moves everything and of energy, okay? The generative principle, true care. That's what this G ultimately represents, the Genesis principle. The Genesis principle. How we create what we get. And so few of us understand that. That's the reason that the world is in the sorry condition that it's in. Okay, so that's the generative principle, or the creation principle, or the